Just 20 minutes after takeoff, Emma heard a voice behind her say, "Glad you could join me. I didn't expect you to be early." She turned and froze. Standing in the aisle was Damien West, the billionaire tech CEO known for being wildly private and rarely photographed. He was even more striking in person, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a sleek navy blazer with a loosened tie, and holding a glass of champagne like he belonged in a movie. But what stood out the most was his expression. He looked more confused than annoyed, his eyebrows slightly raised in curiosity. Emma blinked rapidly, her brain struggling to catch up. "Wait. This isn't Flight 47M2? Damien let out a soft laugh, setting his champagne down on the nearby table. "Nope. This is my jet. And I don't think we've met before, have we?" The panic hit her like a freight train. Her heart pounded in her chest as she scrambled for her bag and stood up, nearly tripping over the plush footrest in front of her seat. "Oh my God, I am so sorry. This must be a mistake. I was supposed to be flying to Miami with my friend Lisa. I don't even know how I got on this plane," she stammered, her voice laced with embarrassment. "This is so awkward. Please just tell the pilot to land somewhere. I'll figure it out." Damien didn't move. In fact, he seemed even more amused now, tilting his head slightly as he watched her flustered reaction. "Relax," he said calmly, taking a sip from his glass. "It's not every day something this interesting happens to me. You know, I've flown solo more times than I can count. Was actually headed to Paris alone." Emma stared at him, completely stunned. "Paris?" He nodded, setting his drink aside. "Yeah, business and a bit of downtime. But now, well, maybe this was meant to happen." Emma sat back down slowly, still gripping her bag like it was a life jacket. She looked around the lavish interior of the private jet. Mahogany paneling, soft golden lighting, leather recliners, and a mini bar that looked more stock than her apartment fridge. This was clearly not her budget vacation flight to Miami. Damien walked over and sat in the chair across from her, his eyes kind but sharp, studying her with a growing curiosity. "So what's your name?" "Emma. Emma Carter," she said softly. "I'm a nurse." He smiled. "Nice to meet you, Nurse Carter." "Damien West." She raised her eyebrows. "Yeah, I kind of figured that out already." He chuckled again, and for a moment the awkwardness lifted. Emma let out a deep breath and leaned back. "This is insane. I don't even know how this happened. You said your flight number was 4G7M2? She nodded. He pulled out his phone and glanced at the manifest. "Well, the jet next to mine was chartered under that code. We both had departures scheduled within 10 minutes of each other. I'm guessing you walked into the wrong jet. And my crew assumed you were one of my guests." Emma covered her face with her hands and groaned. "Lisa is never going to let me live this down." "You're lucky it happened with me," Damien said, raising an eyebrow. "Most CEOs I know would have had a meltdown mid-air." Emma peeked through her fingers. "You're not mad." "Not at all," he replied. "Honestly, it's kind of refreshing. You're clearly not here to pitch me an app, invest in a startup, or talk business. You're just you." She laughed nervously. "Well, I do have some killer Jell-O recipes from the hospital cafeteria, if you're interested." He grinned. "Now that's a pitch I've never heard before." As the jet soared over the Atlantic, their conversation shifted from awkward apologies to genuine interest. Damien asked about her job, her patients, and what it was like working night shifts. Emma, in turn, asked what it was like to run a billion-dollar company, and why he always looked so serious in the photos she'd seen. "Those are my don't talk to me photos," he joked. "But they clearly didn't work on you." She smiled, and for the first time since she boarded, she began to relax. They shared stories, laughed about absurd hospital moments and tech fails, and somewhere over the ocean, something unexpected happened. They connected. Not as billionaire and nurse, but as two people who had accidentally stumbled into a moment that felt oddly right. Hours later, when the pilot announced they were beginning their descent into Paris, Emma sat up straight, eyes wide. "Wait, are we actually landing in Paris? I thought we'd turn around." Damien shrugged casually. "I figured since we were already halfway across the Atlantic, we might as well go." "You've never been, right?" Emma nodded slowly, still processing everything. "Then come with me," he said. "Just for a day or two. I'll get you a flight back afterward." Or Lisa can meet you here if she's not too mad. I don't know, Emma said, hesitating. This is crazy. Life's crazy, Damien replied. But it's also short. And I don't think either of us will forget this flight anytime soon. Emma looked out the window as the lights of Paris came into view. Her heart was racing, but not from nerves anymore. This time it was something else. Excitement. Curiosity. Possibility. She turned to him and smiled. Well, she said, as long as we get croissants first thing in the morning, I'm in. Damien laughed. Deal. And with that, the nurse who boarded the wrong jet was about to step into a new chapter. One filled with charm, unexpected romance, and the city of love waiting below. Sometimes the best stories begin with a mistake. Ask ChatGPT. For the first few hours, Emma was on edge. Her hands wouldn't stop fidgeting in her lap, and her heart felt like it was constantly on a roller coaster. She glanced around the luxurious cabin of the private jet, still trying to convince herself this wasn't a dream, or a very elaborate prank. Every few minutes she asked herself the same question. This can't be real. Did I hit my head? Maybe I fell asleep at work again and I'm dreaming in the break room. But everything around her was too vivid. The leather seats were buttery soft, the chilled sparkling water in her glass fizzed gently, and the man sitting across from her, Damien West, one of the most powerful and mysterious figures in the tech world, was very much real. And the strangest part? He wasn't how she imagined a billionaire to be at all. Emma had expected arrogance, cold detachment, maybe a condescending smirk or two, or at the very least polite indifference. But Damien was warm, curious, surprisingly down to earth. He didn't talk about money or power or the dozen companies under his name. Instead, he asked her questions, real ones. What's the hardest part of being a nurse? Do you ever get used to night shifts? What's the weirdest thing a patient ever said while under anesthesia? Emma found herself laughing more than she expected. She shared stories about stubborn patients, funny mix-ups, and the time a toddler declared her the queen of needles and gave her a jelly bean as tribute. Damien roared with laughter at that one, shaking his head in disbelief. In return, he told her stories of boardroom chaos, algorithms that went hilariously wrong, and his failed attempt to bake a cake for his sister's birthday, which ended with a fire extinguisher and a smoke alarm that wouldn't stop beeping for an hour. They talked about childhood dreams. Emma once wanted to be a zookeeper. Damien had been obsessed with space travel. They both admitted a soft spot for cheesy romantic comedies, and when she confessed she'd watched Notting Hill 10 times, he grinned and admitted he cried at the end of The Notebook. It was surreal, this strange connection forming between two people who just hours earlier had never met. Somewhere between the laughter and shared stories, the awkwardness melted away. By the time the pilot announced their descent into Paris, Emma was sitting comfortably, legs tucked beneath her, sipping a second glass of citrus water, completely unaware of how quickly the time had passed. She looked out the window as the glittering city came into view. The Eiffel Tower sparkled like a jewel in the distance, and rows of golden lights outlined the streets below. It took her breath away. Wow, she whispered. Damien leaned over slightly, watching her reaction. It never gets old, he said softly. First time. She nodded. I always said I'd come here someday. Didn't think it would be like this. He smiled. Some of the best stories start with the weirdest detours. When they touched down, a sleek black car was already waiting on the runway. The driver opened the door with a polite nod, and Emma hesitated. She turned to Damien, suddenly remembering reality. I should find a hotel. I mean, I can't just stay with you. That would be crazy. He didn't pressure her. Instead, he simply looked her in the eyes with that calm, confident demeanor of his and said, only if you promise to join me for dinner tonight. Paris is too beautiful to experience alone. Emma opened her mouth to protest, but the sincerity in his eyes stopped her. He wasn't being presumptuous, he was being kind. She felt it, even more clearly than she wanted to admit. She finally nodded, letting out a soft laugh. Dinner then hotel. Deal. They arrived at Damien's penthouse just as the city bathed itself in the golden hues of twilight. The building was modern, elegant, tucked quietly along the Seine. His apartment was nothing short of breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened up to a sweeping view of Paris, with the Eiffel Tower dominating the skyline. The space was surprisingly cozy, soft lighting, bookshelves lined with novels, and a faint smell of lavender from a candle burning on a nearby table. Emma wandered toward the window, the surrealness of it all crashing down on her again. Damien stood nearby, giving her space, watching her take it all in. "This doesn't feel real," she said quietly. He walked over and stood beside her. "That's the best kind of adventure, isn't it?" She turned to him and smiled. "You're full of unexpected lines." He raised a playful eyebrow. "You haven't seen anything yet." Emma laughed, and something in her chest fluttered. She wasn't sure if it was nerves or excitement, or both. Later that evening, she arrived at the small restaurant Damien had chosen, located just a short walk from his apartment. It was a charming bistro tucked between cobbled alleys and twinkling cafe lights. The scent of fresh bread and garlic hung in the air. Inside, the staff greeted Damien by name, and he introduced Emma like they were old friends. The dinner was light, joyful, and intimate. They shared escargot. Damien dared her to try it, and she surprised herself by actually liking it. They split a bottle of red wine, and their conversation flowed effortlessly, as if they'd known each other far longer than just a few hours. There was music playing in the background, soft and jazzy, and at one point Damien offered his hand. "May I?" Emma blinked. "What?" He gestured toward the open patio under the stars. "Dance with me." Laughing, she took his hand. They moved slowly beneath the Paris night sky, the Eiffel Tower lighting up behind them, and for the first time in years, Emma let go of control. She wasn't the overworked nurse. She wasn't the girl who took the wrong jet. She was just a woman, dancing under the stars with a man she never expected to meet, in a city made for magic. And deep down, a quiet part of her wondered, what if this wasn't a mistake at all? Ask ChatGPT. That night, Paris sparkled. The sky above was clear, the stars just visible above the city's warm golden glow, and the Eiffel Tower stood in the distance like a jewel-encrusted monument, lighting up every hour with dazzling brilliance. The air smelled of fresh bread, flowers, and the occasional swirl of roasted chestnuts from street vendors below. It was the kind of night that didn't just look romantic. It felt like a dream waiting to unfold. Damien took Emma to a rooftop restaurant that seemed like something out of a movie. It wasn't the kind of place that screamed luxury but rather whispered charm. Soft candlelight flickered on each table. The clink of glasses mingled with low laughter, and vines crawled along the iron railings. It was intimate without trying too hard, elegant without being intimidating. Emma sat down across from Damien, the Eiffel Tower perfectly framed behind him. For a moment she just stared at the view, hardly believing she was there. The lights of Paris stretched out like a sea of gold, each building glowing softly, each car below a tiny reminder of the real world. "Do you bring all your accidental guests here?" she asked, her tone playful. Damien chuckled as he handed her the wine menu. "No. Most of them are a lot less interesting and much more intentional." Emma smiled, shaking her head, still marveling at the bizarre sequence of events that had brought her here. One wrong flight, one mistaken jet, and suddenly she was having dinner in Paris with one of the world's most elusive billionaires. And yet, the strange part was how natural it all felt. They ordered food. Damien recommended the escargot, which made Emma pause. "I've never eaten snails before," she said skeptically. "You've never truly visited Paris until you've at least tried," he replied. She raised an eyebrow but agreed. And when the dish arrived, delicately prepared and smelling of garlic and butter, she took a hesitant bite. Her face twisted first with caution, then with pleasant surprise. "That's not awful," she admitted, making Damien laugh. They moved on to entrees and then dessert, an absurdly overpriced chocolate soufflé with gold leaf. Emma couldn't help but joke about. "Gold on dessert," she said. "Now I know I've officially crossed into billionaire territory." "You deserve gold," Damien said casually. "Just not for the reasons people think." She looked up, meeting his eyes, and for a moment the teasing mood shifted. There was something about the way he said it, not flirtatious, not performative, just sincere. Honest. The kind of compliment that wasn't about surface-level charm but something deeper. After dinner, they stepped onto the restaurant's open terrace, where a local street musician had set up in the far corner. A slow, soulful jazz tune drifted into the air, and couples swayed to the rhythm under the stars. Paris seemed to hum around them, alive and glowing, suspended in a kind of magic that made anything seem possible. Damien turned to her and held out a hand. "Dance with me." Emma's eyebrows shot up. "Here." "Why not?" he asked, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of his lips. She hesitated, then slid her hand into his. He led her gently into the open space. They moved slowly, the music wrapping around them like a soft breeze. At first, Emma was aware of every step, every glance they might be drawing from other diners, but soon all of that faded. It was just them. Somewhere between the laughter and the wine, between the glances and the soft music, something shifted. Emma felt herself leaning in. Not just physically but emotionally. There was a pull toward Damien that she hadn't expected. It wasn't the setting or the food or even the fact that he was who he was. It was him. The way he listened. The way he looked at her like she was the only person in the world. The way he didn't try to impress her because he didn't have to. And Damien, he looked at Emma differently. He saw something rare in her. Not awe or excitement over his status, but presence. She was real in a way people around him rarely were. Most treated him like a brand or a stepping stone or a symbol of wealth. Emma saw none of that. She treated him like a person. Like a man who happened to be in the sky at the right or maybe wrong moment. As they danced, he leaned closer. "You know," he said quietly, "this is the first time in years that I haven't checked my phone every 10 minutes. Emma smiled, her cheek resting lightly against his shoulder. "You're welcome." He paused, then added, "You're the first person in a long time who's talked to me like, well, me." Emma pulled back slightly, meeting his eyes. There was no arrogance in his voice. No pity. Just quiet vulnerability. Caught her off guard. "I think sometimes we forget," she said, "that the people everyone looks up to still want to be seen." Damien didn't respond right away. Instead, he held her gaze for a moment longer before nodding. "Exactly." They danced until the song ended. And when the final note drifted into the Paris night, neither of them moved. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was warm, electric, full of unspoken understanding. As they walked back through the quiet city streets, neither wanted to break the moment. The soft sound of footsteps, the occasional breeze, and the distant hum of laughter from other corners of Paris filled the space around them. They passed a bridge where locks of love clung to the railings, hundreds of tiny symbols of romance and memory. Emma paused, fingers brushing one of the locks. "Ever put one up?" she asked. Damien shook his head. "No. I always thought if I did, it should mean something." She looked up at him, the question lingering in her eyes. He met her gaze. "Maybe it will. Someday." And just like that, a spark lit between them. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady, real, and impossible to ignore. That night, Paris didn't just sparkle. It changed something in both of them. What was supposed to be a 2-day stop in Paris turned into 5, almost without either of them realizing it. Time had a funny way of slipping past when the world felt like magic. Emma woke up each morning to the gentle glow of the Parisian sun pouring through the large windows of her hotel room, just down the street from Damien's penthouse. Every day brought something new. A corner of the city she'd never imagined, a flavor she'd never tasted, a conversation she didn't want to end. Paris wrapped around her like a soft, dreamy blanket, and somehow Damien was at the center of it all. They spent their days wandering the city with no real plans. One morning they visited the Louvre, where Emma stood in awe of centuries of art, especially when Damien quietly explained the symbolism in some of the Renaissance paintings like he was sharing a secret. He didn't brag about his knowledge. He just shared, simply, earnestly. Emma teased him when he overanalyzed the Mona Lisa's smile, and he laughed, admitting he had no idea what it meant either, but it was fun to pretend. In Montmartre they got completely lost, winding through cobbled streets and little shops that seemed untouched by time. They stumbled upon a group of artists sketching portraits near the Sacré-Cœur. One offered to draw them together. Emma hesitated, but Damien sat down with a smile and said, "Why not? Let's make it official. Proof you were here." When the sketch was done, they both laughed. The artist had exaggerated Damien's chin and given Emma impossibly wide eyes. It was terrible and wonderful at the same time. Damien insisted on buying it, framing it later and placing it on a shelf in his penthouse like it was a masterpiece. One afternoon they took a cooking class in a small studio kitchen tucked behind a local bakery. The instructor, a lively older woman named Claudine, had no patience for poor technique but a heart full of warmth. Emma accidentally burned the soufflé, and the entire class erupted in laughter. Damien didn't do much better. His tart collapsed like a deflated balloon, but he made it look intentional and dramatic, blaming it on software glitches in the flour. But the highlight wasn't the food, it was the apron he wore. Somehow, Claudine had given him the only one in the stack that read, "Kiss the Billionaire." Emma burst into laughter when she saw it and snapped a photo before he could take it off. He groaned, "This is going to haunt me," and she replied, "Only if I ever go back to Chicago and remember this wasn't a dream." For those 5 days it was easy to forget who he was. Damien wasn't the tech mogul. He wasn't the billionaire. He was just Damien, the guy who got flour on his shirt, the one who held Emma's hand as they crossed busy streets, who paused to take photos of her pretending to be a statue, and who listened when she talked about the emotional toll of working nights in a hospital full of strangers who trusted her with their lives. But the world had a way of creeping in. By the 3rd day they noticed people staring more. Damien kept his head down, wearing a baseball cap, but it didn't take long for someone to recognize him. Then came the first blurry photo, just the back of his head as they left a cafe. Then another, with Emma visible this time, laughing as they shared a crepe under an umbrella near the Seine. The headlines started small. "Who is the mystery woman with Damien West?" Then they grew louder, more invasive. "Reclusive tech billionaire spotted in Paris with unknown brunette." Some speculated Emma was an heiress, others thought she might be a model. The truth that she was a nurse from Chicago who boarded the wrong jet by accident seemed too strange to be believed. Emma tried to brush it off at first, but when they were followed by 2 photographers during a quiet walk through Le Marais, something shifted inside her. It wasn't fear, it was guilt. She didn't want to be the reason his name was splashed across gossip blogs. His quiet life poked and prodded. That night they sat on the balcony of his penthouse, sipping wine under the stars. The Eiffel Tower blinked in the distance, the lights flickering like a heartbeat. Emma was quiet. Too quiet. Damien turned to her, sensing the change. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded, then shook her head. "I think maybe I should go home." He didn't answer right away. She looked at him, trying to explain. "I didn't mean for this to become a spectacle," she said. "I boarded the wrong plane. I never planned for this for us. I don't want to make your life complicated." He watched her for a long moment, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on the balcony railing. "You haven't complicated my life," he said softly. "You've reminded me what it means to live it." Emma looked at him, eyes uncertain. "I don't care what the headlines say," he continued. "I don't care if they think you're an actress or a socialite, or my secret wife from another life. I care about what you say. And I say I'm glad you boarded the wrong plane." Tears welled in her eyes, catching her off guard. She looked away, wiping them quickly. "You mean that?" she whispered. He reached over, took her hand and squeezed it gently. "I've spent years surrounded by people who only see what I have. You're the first person in a long time who's seen me. Not the money. Not the headlines. Just me." Emma didn't know what to say. So instead, she leaned her head on his shoulder, letting the silence speak for her. In that moment, with Paris twinkling below and the noise of the world fading away, everything made sense. A mistake had led her here. But it didn't feel like a mistake anymore. It felt like the beginning of something extraordinary. Ask ChatGPT. When it was finally time to leave, Emma felt a tug at her heart she hadn't expected. What had begun as a chaotic mistake, a simple mix-up at a private terminal, had turned into something more meaningful than anything she had experienced in years. 5 days in Paris with a man she had known for barely a week, and yet somehow she felt like she was walking away from something that mattered. She stood in the center of her hotel room that morning, her suitcase open on the bed, clothes folded neatly inside, souvenirs tucked between sweaters and toiletries. But it all felt surreal, like she was packing up a dream. The thought of going back to her routine, the hospital halls, the long night shifts, the coffee breaks at 3 a.m., suddenly felt hollow. Not bad, just empty in comparison. Damien had offered to have his driver take her to the airport, but Emma insisted on taking a taxi. She said it would help her clear her head, help her process everything. But as she sat in the back of the car watching the streets of Paris slide past her window, she realized there was no way to make sense of it all. There were no rules for something like this. No roadmap for what happened when you accidentally stumbled into someone's world and stayed there. At the airport, she found Damien already waiting near her gate, leaning against a column with his hands in his pockets. He looked calm, but his eyes gave him away. He smiled when he saw her, and for a brief moment everything else, the announcements overhead, the rolling suitcases, the noise of the terminal, faded into the background. They didn't say much at first. It was one of those goodbyes that didn't want to admit it was happening. "I guess this is it," Emma finally said, breaking the silence, her voice softer than usual. Damien looked at her for a long moment, then pulled something from the inside of his coat. A slim white envelope. "What's that?" she asked, brow furrowed. He handed it to her. Emma opened it slowly, uncertain of what to expect. Inside was a ticket. Not for her flight home to Chicago. It was a one-way ticket back to Paris. She blinked, reading it twice just to be sure. Damien stepped closer, his voice steady. "There's something about you, Emma. Something I can't ignore. You make my world feel human again. Like it's not just business deals and deadlines. Like I can breathe. And I don't want this to end. Not yet." Emma stood frozen, the ticket still in her hand. The words hit her harder than she expected. He wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't offering her a vacation or an escape. He was offering her a choice. A chance to return. Not to luxury but to something real. For a moment, she didn't say anything. The weight of the moment hung between them. Then she smiled. Not a big dramatic grin, but the kind of smile that comes from deep within, quiet, warm, certain. She folded the ticket and slid it into her purse. "You're really something, you know that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Damien smiled back. "I hope that's a good thing." "It is," she said. "It really is." They didn't make promises. They didn't need to. Emma boarded the flight back home a few minutes later, but her heart felt lighter than it should have. Because even though she was heading back to Chicago, a part of her knew she wasn't closing a chapter. She was just turning a page. The days that followed were strange, filled with the buzz of friends wanting to know everything, coworkers asking about the headlines, and Lisa practically screaming when she heard what had happened. But Emma kept most of it to herself, holding those 5 days in Paris like a secret too precious to share in full. She went back to work, put on her scrubs, and took vitals like she always did. But something had shifted in her. A sense of adventure. A new openness. The knowledge that life could change, not just slowly over time but all at once in the blink of an eye with one accidental decision. And then one quiet afternoon, about a week after she got home, she found a letter waiting at her door. No return address, just her name written in sharp, careful script. Inside, tucked between a single sheet of paper, was a photo. The sketch they'd bought in Montmartre. And beneath it a note. "There are a million ways this could have gone. But I'm glad it went this way. Paris is still waiting. So am I. D." Emma pressed the sketch to her chest and closed her eyes. The nurse who had accidentally boarded the wrong jet was no longer wondering how she got there. She was wondering where this journey would take her next. Maybe it would be Paris again. Maybe somewhere new. But wherever it was, she knew this much for sure. She had boarded the right kind of adventure, one filled with laughter, with late-night dancing, with impossible soufflés, and with a man who saw her not as a stranger, not as a mistake, but as the most unexpected part of his world. And just like that, a mistake became a beginning. If you enjoyed this unbelievable story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more real-life fairy tales and heartwarming twists of fate. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a story that could change the way you see the world. Ask ChatGPT. Ask ChatGPT.